You're listening to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast, the show with a light-hearted look at the eventing world, all of the big event previews, reviews, and special guests, and of course, backed up with all of the key Echo Ratings stats. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Whole Box. It's been a few weeks, but we managed to sneak our way back into the schedule. What I have tonight is a great episode on feet and farriery, and I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to get anyone that's going to come on this, then I need to get the Team GB Farrier. So I have. Greig Elliot, good evening. How are you? Thank you for coming on.
Hello, I'm very well, thank you, Spike. Pleasure.
Excellent. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to have Greg on, who I'm very lucky to work with at various yards, I thought I'd get someone on, one of our regulars, to join us, to be part of the team. And we're already a little bit of a team of three managing her horses. Kitty King, good evening. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Good to speak to you all.
How are we enjoying this this very dry, hot weather at the moment?
I would love it if I was by a beach and the sea, but not quite so keen with the horses. It makes it... it's just a bit hot for them all at the moment, so we're trying to kind of start early and get them done in the cool. But yeah, I love the hot weather, but not so much when I have to work with it.
Did I not see you down at Bournemouth, Kitty, down there, like, you know, one of the 500,000 people? Anyway, we must not go into politics.
What, with my bikini and my lockdown body hanging out?
Well, I was more thinking, you know, with your bucket and spade, but, you know, that's each their own. Yeah, God, it's hot at the moment, isn't it? We've been inundated with lots of vettings at work, and standing in the middle of a school, let alone you guys riding in it. It's hot work at the moment. What about Greg? Tough hot work when you're at the back of a lorry.
It's warm stood next to a forge, and it's belting out at you, punching stud holes again.
Oh, tough times.
Testing,
I always think farriers can pull off a vest top that I think vets really just wouldn't want to go anywhere near. So,
it's not my style. Not my style.
No, oh, very good.
No.
I've not seen Greg in a vest top yet.
I was going to call it something else, but I was going to call it something else, but I thought it was really non-PC, so we'll probably move on from that. Grand. Well, look, welcome you to the Whole Box. I always like to start my episode of the Whole Box to ask any the people on it if they've got a Whole Box story or stuck in a trot up story. I was going to prompt Greg on one because I remember seeing Greg actually trotting a horse up at badminton. What was that all about?
Yeah, when was that? 2000? Was that last year? 2019. All-Star B, my friend All-Star B, had a phone call from Dickie on the Tuesday saying, just pop a shirt and trousers in for Wednesday, mate. He said, you might have to trot Albie up. And I was thinking, no, I'm up for this. I can do this. I've been to badminton lots of times and all about the trot up, and then it dawns on you have all the cameras on you, all the crowds, the atmosphere, and he's a big chap, isn't he, All-Star B? And I think that was why, because he can play up a little bit, so Roz just thought, hand the reins over to me.
Was it a proper thrill going through the arch?
Yeah, it was, but do you know what, I cannot remember very much about it. I remember the grand jury asking me, where's Roz? The rest of it is just a blur. I just prayed that he was well behaved, and I concentrated on giving him a little walk first, keeping him straight, doing the turn, then coming back, and just hearing the clicking. That's all I can remember, is the clicking of the cameras. And then quickly handing him back to Sarah, his groom, and job done. As soon as they say accepted, I was like, yes, my work here is done.
It must have been quite nerve-wracking though, because I get nervous doing the trot up anyway with my own horses, because they're all absolutely fine, but you always have this fear that the ground jury will see something really weird and may make you trot again or send you to a whole box, and it must be nerve-wracking. Yeah, well, it must be nerve-wracking being in charge of someone else's horse, because I find it bad enough being in charge of my own.
Yeah,
I think as the vet on the side, it's one of those things where you've got to give the impression that you're like literally the duck on the water, that everything's fine and everything's calm, but inside you're thinking the same thing of everything will be fine, everything will be fine.
Yeah. But Liz Brown took some awesome photos, so yeah, I've got that on my mantelpiece. Me and Albie trotting up at badminton.
Bless it. So Liz Brown, who's the team vet for Team GB. So yeah, she would be the one analysing if you've done the job correctly or not.
Exactly.
I'm sure.
We had a few practice trots before. I was given strict instructions.
And you didn't fall over like Kitty was telling us about her story when she was at the Young Riders.
Oh, no,
yeah, I fell over.
No. Yeah, I remember that kid. Good old Molly.
Oh. I know. I'm never going to live that one down, but never mind.
Right. Well, let's get into this. It's a subject that there's been a lot of discussion on the Flick group, and there's been a lot of requests for putting this show together. So hopefully we can cover a lot of areas this evening. And I always feel sometimes that we touch on things and probably don't go as fully into the subject as we probably could do, but hopefully it can be a starting point for people gathering a bit of information, or at least getting something that they can go back to their own home team and talk about. So, but I thought I'd just start with it. Greg, what would you think is the most important skill that you have in your armoury that makes you the great farrier that you are? That was a bit crazy, wasn't it? I would never say anything that nice to the rest of the team. So it's only because you're a guest.
You want to, what do you need?
I could answer that for Greg.
That's a good. Yeah, go on then, Kit. That's a good input.
If we agree.
To me, Greg is like fully dedicated to. I know he shoes for a lot of people, but it feels like when he's here, he is fully dedicated to my horses, and he wants the absolute best for them. He's very detailed in what he does. He always watches them trot up, how they're placing their feet. He invested in a crazy piece of kit, which I don't know what it's called, but it maps where the horse's foot is landing and its swing and things like that, which you can look at all on his laptop. And, he really leaves no stone unturned, and I never have to worry about my horses and their feet because Greg is just fully dedicated to my horses, which I think is really, really important, and he's very, very skillful as well.
Oh, thanks, Kit.
No problem.
From your point of view, Greg, what do you think that when you think of the skill set that you have, and how do you approach being as good as you can be at your job every day? What is it that you really aim to achieve every day?
I try to be very reflective, reflect on my own work, and always try to improve and do the best I can on that horse. Know I've walked away knowing I can't do it any better. And like Kit says, always watch it walk, watch it trot. And it's not just about shoeing the foot. It's about shoeing the whole horse, having a holistic approach and multifaceted, and like working with the riders, the grooms, vets and physio. And, if something needs to be implemented, don't take it personally. It's for the benefit of the horse and everyone else, not a personal insult to the farrier. And just try and keep it simple and do the fundamentals well. I think that is the way I try and do everything.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, isn't it? Like that, keeping it simple and getting the fundamentals right. I always think that there sometimes can be in all walks of life, even the veterinary world and everything, is that attention to detail sometimes gets confused as thinking of that it's every single detail, when actually attention to detail is getting the fundamentals really correct. So I think that's something that I would agree from what I try and achieve every day from a veterinary point of view. You mentioned in there, what are we actually trying to achieve when it comes to shoeing our sports horses and competition horses, and in particularly in this scenario with eventers? What is it that we are trying to provide to horses to enable them to do the job as best as they can?
Yeah, well, I'm looking for it to be sound and the foot balanced to the limb, so kind of perpendicular to the skeleton and shod with adequate support, but maintain the structural integrity. You can make things look pretty by rasping them, but the foot loses its strength and will fall to pieces. They need to be sound on their feet to be able to perform. Especially these event horses, they're thrown in at every discipline and on different ground, different terrain, And if they're feeling short on one foot, then that'll have an effect on the opposing limb. So we kind of look at everything and keep them happy.
That's a really important point, and I suppose, and I think Kitty would probably have the same opinion from a training and what she does with her horses every day as well, is that what we ask of our event horses is a combination of so many disciplines, and therefore shoeing them and managing them. It's not as though you can say, well, we've got a dressage horse and this is how we're going to shoe it because we know how it's going to work in a certain way. We're asking these horses to work on different surfaces in a different way every day. So how do you take that into account when you're planning what shoes you're going to use, for example? There's been some questions in our Flick group about the different shoes and what's available and why different ones are used. What if we take it down to really basic, simple principles? How do you choose what shoe you are using for our eventers or for different eventers?
Yeah, so for the event horses, I tend to a concave section. So that means that inside of the steel is sloping in, and it mimics the cup of the foot. So the horse can have traction, and it's lightweight. It has a groove down the middle, and it's multi-purpose. For instance, like a dressage horse is working on the surface. Exactly like you said, we know that it's going to be on that surface the whole time. But a horse travelling at speed cross country, it needs that purchase in the ground to be able to turn corners and to propel itself forward.
Did you know, Kitty, that there are different shoes with different grip? Do you pick up the feet and notice that there's sort of different ways that can happen? Because I think it's something that people sometimes aren't aware of about that variation.
No, definitely, because quite often when you've brought a horse over, maybe from abroad, they've got a very different type of shoe on to what Greg would use, and then even some of my horses, they've got slightly different shoes from one another. Most of mine have quarter clips rather than just the one toe clip, but some do have just the one toe clip. And some of them, when you pick the feet up, you're like, well, that's a different type of shoe to the next horse. But Greg's are a lot more kind of, the continental ones just have no grip, and they seem really very wide and very kind of flat and slidey. And Greg's confident that the horses aren't going to be slipping and sliding around when you're trying to go, a bit quicker around tighter corners, cross country and things like that.
Yeah. And that's a good point as well, isn't it? It's having that communication with your farrier in your team about what's working, what's not working, what level of work the horse is in, what type of work, what surfaces it's working on, because there is such variability in what can be achieved with the different shoes. I go from different yards, and sometimes you just notice that they're not necessarily having that line of communication. It's sometimes very easy to be like, well, I'm not sure if my farrier is doing a great job because my horse is slipping on the roads. And I say, well, have you discussed it? Is that something that, if it's important to you and it's something that you need to discuss, have you had that conversation in a sort of a sensible and open way? And often they haven't. And often it hasn't been explained that the horse is doing 4 weeks and, out hacking at the moment because it's January, and that hasn't necessarily been explained. So that communication of, working together is really important. And when you say, Greg, that's sometimes it's just assumed that the farrier comes in and the horse is tied up and off they go and do the job. But if they don't get feedback and they don't get that level of communication, then they're sort of doing the job with one hand tied behind their back.
Yeah, and Kit is so tuned in. Even if I use a different brand of shoes that has a different profile of the steel, she notices. And if I don't see her one time and forget to tell her, then she's like, "Oh, did you put different shoes on him last time?" I was like, "Yeah, I did."
But also, I'll kind of quite often say to you, won't I, Greg? Oh, this one's slipping a bit on the road. Can you put some, road nails in? Or like some of the horses at one point, Sprout would have them in as standard, but most of mine wouldn't. But I would always kind of mention if something was kind of not really keeping its balance very well on the slippier surfaces, and I'd kind of just mention to Greg, "Oh, it's just doing this or just doing that. Could you have a look at it?" And normally Greg will come up with some other plan that will work, for that horse.
So, Greg, you've already mentioned that how your role fits into the team, and I noted, in preparation for this evening, I noted a couple of things down there that I thought that I think about what you bring to, your role, particularly in Kitty's team, because we work as a group there. And I think you've already mentioned it, that sort of regular trotting up of horses. Why do you think that's so important in what you do? You do trot up every horse before you shoe them. Why do you feel as though that's something that is essential for you to do a good job?
Yeah, well, that was taught to me very early on in my apprenticeship, and I was very lucky. I did a great apprenticeship with a guy called Billy Crothers in Hertfordshire. Spent 7 years with him, and we used to walk and trot every horse up. And it's just knowing your horses so well that if in 4 or 5 weeks' time they've changed their swing phase or their landing, but as a farrier you haven't changed your system, then something has changed within the horse. So the rider may not notice it if it changes a fraction, 0.5% every day, but over a month that adds up to quite a lot. It's just having that feedback loop. You can have that conversation and go from there, and they can deal with it or bring someone else in, or we can work backwards and see what the trigger was or where it started.
Yeah, that's definitely happened over the years, hasn't it, Greg? I've had phone calls from clients that you shoe, and it's the first person to have noticed that the horse isn't quite sound is yourself, because you're trotting the horse up more regularly than anyone else. In best will in the world, the vet's not necessarily in the yard once a month to trot every horse up. And also in the best will in the world, how many people are also trotting their own horses up, without being asked to do it, every time, that gold standard, yes, they may be. And, and that's such an essential part of the team. And, I think I would say Greg probably sees Kitty's horses trot up more often than I do, and therefore that's such a valuable part of that feedback loop. I think another thing that you mentioned earlier as well, Greg, is like abnormal shoe wear, and how that is. Can you give us all a bit of an example about something that you might note when it comes to taking the old shoes off that is relevant to something that you would do differently, or feedback to the rider on?
Yeah, I think if a horse is suddenly wearing the outside of his front shoes down and having a different landing pattern, or maybe even behind, he's squaring his toes off, and then these are all signs that there may be some discomfort somewhere. So it might necessarily not be in the foot, but there is discomfort somewhere. So if we can talk to yourself or talk to somebody and see if we can work out where. Yeah.
Definitely. That sort of the hind feet is quite a good one as well. And also sometimes it's their posture as well, don't you? You will sometimes, the horses that suddenly don't become quite as comfortable to stand with their leg up for you to do the job.
A lot of the time when you kind of trot them up, I'm not always there because I'm riding another horse. But whenever I come in, I'll be like, oh, how did it trot up, Greg? And you're like, oh, yeah, all good. But actually, when I was shoeing it behind, it felt a bit this or a bit that, or it didn't really want to, have it split right up underneath it when I was clenching up. And those are all things which then I kind of will mention to my physio or to the vet, depending on how, serious you think it is. But you will notice things like that more than, I would when I was just picking their feet up and picking their feet out normally. And so I find that kind of feedback and information always very, very useful.
Yeah, those marginal little changes, and most of the time it is just stiffness, or once they've seen the physio they're much happier and they revert to how they were before, but it's just nipping it in the bud before it becomes an issue.
Yeah, and it's the feedback of having that continuity, that you are picking it, you are shoeing the horse every 4 to 5 weeks, whatever the cycle might be, and something's different this week, and it's not, it's just the horse is being a pain in the backside today. It's doing something differently because something's changed. And we were saying already about the attention to detail and picking up those details, that something that can seem quite small can actually lead to unraveling into something that can really help horses, and picking things up early, as Kitty said, nipping something in the bud. So I think that's a really important thing. I would say that real team approach, the support team for these horses. And we mentioned it on our previous physiotherapy podcast on the whole box, that it's a group effort, it's a group support structure, and a little bit of information from one part of that feeds back to everyone so that we can be in a position of supporting these horses the best as we can, and that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the top level eventers that that Kitty's riding and we're talking about here, but that same support team is there for every horse at every level that everyone's doing, and often the horse is trying to tell us something, and it's making sure that we're listening, and they often will be trying to give us that information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything else that I'm missing out there? These were just the three little things that I wrote down thinking about it. Anything else that you've thought of as things that have flagged to you, Greg, that have led to being able to improve the horse as a whole? Tell us a bit more about your foot balance system, your computer app that Kitty was mentioning at the beginning.
Yeah, Workman Black. It's a new product. I've only had it a few months and just kind of still getting used to it, but it's revolutionary. It's a gait analysis. You put 2 accelerometer sensors on the dorsal wall, walk and trot the horse up and down, and gives you an animation of footfall and tells you the timings of the landing phase, mid-stance, the swing phase, and breakover. And that again is so subtle that it can pick up abnormalities that sometimes our eyes can't see because they happen so quickly. And these again can just be precursors to something changing, or we can make a modification to the shoe, just kind of maybe ease breakover. Something's rolling the section a bit more just so you can facilitate the breakover so there's less energy used, and then you do it again and you get a better reading. So you're trying to even up the 2 feet to make just a better pattern.
Okay. And you just mentioned a term there, and let's just make sure that all our listeners are aware of it. Breakover. It's something that we talk about, and I tell you what, I go to yard, and people are like, "Oh, I want my farrier to shorten its toe, and they need to bring the toe back. They need to bring the toe back." I mean, everyone's an amateur of farrier. I mean, everyone's an amateur vet as well sometimes, but everyone's an amateur farrier. But that relates to breakover. Just explain what that term means and what when you say you want to ease breakover, what are you achieving there?
Okay, so yeah, breakover, and there's breakover and breakover point. So breakover is the time the horse comes out of mid-stance, so the time that the heel starts to come off the floor. That is the period of breakover to the point that the toe leaves the floor. And point to breakover is the final point where the toe leaves the floor. So they do get a bit confused. It's a bit of a subjective topic. And
then the nice machine that you were just referencing, and you have to give me the name again, but that takes away that subjectivity, doesn't it? It gives you an exact number. Definitely. It gives you a point of where that breakover point is, and that's something that can then be presumably traced and tracked over time. Yeah,
and exactly, it gives you a validation and it gives you a baseline, and you can work from it for the rest of the horse's career. And the thing about shortening toes is, it's kind of the textbook that everyone's looking for, and unfortunately the textbook balance doesn't exist, and there's a really important artery around the front of the foot called the circumflex artery. So you generally don't want to be backing feet up too far, because as soon as you start putting pressure on an artery, you start affecting the blood flow, and you really need to look after the back half of the foot, because that's where all the sensitive structures are: the digital cushion, the bulbs of heels, insertion of the flexor tendon, and it's the mechanism of the back of the foot which is absorbs all the shock. It's a very important mechanism.
Okay. Kit, are we educating you as well here, Kitty? Are you comfortable with that concept of breakover?
I've been well educated this evening. It's great.
Yeah,
very good.
Farrier conference.
Yeah.
But I think it is a good point, and I think you referenced it already, Kitty, about the difference that you've got. Some of your horses in the yard will have quarter clip shoes, so a clip on, on 2 sides, a bit like a hind shoe traditionally, and some horses will have a toe clip in the front. And why would you choose one shoe or the other, Greg, for example? Because that a little bit of that is to do with breakover and foot shape. Let's use that as a little bit of an example of that.
Yes, a toe clip shoe you can only bring back as far as the wall will allow you, because you don't want to cut it into the wall to weaken the wall and lose the integrity. But a side clip shoe is quite sympathetic. You can just set it under the toe a little bit. So what we're always trying to achieve is the hoof pattern access alignment. And if this is deviated in any way, then it can cause, if it's broken back, for instance, which means that the toe is long and the heels are dropped, and that puts more pressure on the back of the foot. So by setting the shoe slightly under the toe and using the side clips to position your shoe, you can realign the hoof pattern access without damaging the wall.
Yeah, and it's we're going to go for a massive generalization here, but generally the thoroughbred types have that sort of traditional, slightly long toe, weak heel sort of conformation, and though that, as you say, that sort of shoe really suits them, doesn't it? Whereas the more warm-bled types with their sort of slightly more upright, narrow, I'm not going to go as far as boxy feet, suit the toe clip shoe, because you know, if you had a quarter clip shoe, they would sort of lean forward and their heels come off the ground.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, look, hopefully we've educated everyone there a little bit. We've definitely educated Kitty, because she's gone very quiet, so that's good. She's taking it all in.
Taking notes.
Taking notes. She's just thinking of all the good questions for the next time you're on the yard.
Yeah, I'll be quizzing Greg.
Very good. Cool. Well, no, I think it's important to go through these things because, as I say, you know, when you go from yard to yard from a vet's point of view, sometimes I think farriers get a degree of criticism, and you know, and the one thing that you hear absolutely repeatedly is the toe's too long, and owners or riders or whoever it is, that that's something they can very obviously see. But a lot of the time, the farrier's got a plan, and there's a reason why the shoe is being, you know, the foot is being shod in that way, and it's fair to ask that question. I mean, you in your role as a team farrier, Greg, you do some, you know, you must travel around and to different yards and things like that, and working with different farriers. Is that something that you come across, that sort of, not particularly necessarily in that team role with those riders, but is that something that, speaking to your farrier mates that are around the country, that is something that you come across?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of pressure put on the farriers to like I said, try and make that textbook foot. But it's just being, I think the farrier being educated enough and being able to, it comes back to communication again, you know, be able to have that conversation with their client to show them how a foot should line up or why a foot can't line up, but we can make adaptations to the shoe, modifications to the shoe to compensate for that problem.
Yeah. Totally agree. You know, that communication, you know, that feedback loop of getting that communication so that it's open, honest, and is based on facts and not just seeing a job being done and worrying about it afterwards. So, yeah, I think that I just wanted it. I think it's an important subject to touch on, and I'm pleased that we've covered it. I want to just go on to your team role, Greg. What does that job include, being the team farrier for Team GB? Sometimes it's in the past it was slightly joked that you were sort of put the flags up at the events, but I know I see the work you do in the, you know, at the events. So what does that role?
He still does that.
He still does that.
I do do that. Yeah, I do that. It looked like a fate, didn't it, getting the Newland?
Yeah, it did. And he'd put all our beds down
more
for us
when
we got there.
Yeah.
So what is it? So Team Farrier, more than just the flag putter upper.
Yeah, so I started in 2017. Stregon was my first Europeans, and yeah, that was an experience. That was sweltering hot when we got there. So I generally, well, and my role is the team, so I'm kind of caretakers for all the home farriers. They obviously can't go to the championship, so it's my job to have a good relationship with them, get to know all the podium horses as well as possible. Once the team's selected, I speak again to the farriers who look after the horses, and they make me up a little packet of 2 sets of old shoes, and also any treatment that they've ever done on the horse that they know works for a certain problem, because all horses are individual, and I think it's important to be specific for that horse rather than for me to go there and just use a generic treatment to try and fix an issue if we have one. So I normally head out to the championship early. So I'm there. It's when the horses arrive, if anyone's moved a shoe, that we can fix that straight away. And whilst we're waiting for them, we set up camp, decorate flags, put the beds down.
Don't laugh.
Yeah,
that's
really
an important job.
Yeah, it is. So the horses get there and they can have a walk, have a stretch, go in and have a roll and be happy. And it's important for the girls as well, because all the grooms, the boys as well, because they've generally had a long journey and they're shattered when they get there. So it's one less job for them to do. Try and help them out as much as we can.
And would you ever be in a position of planning to change shoes at a championship or anything like that, or is plan A what they arrive in is what they're going home in?
Yeah, normally we don't change much. Luckily, all the home farriers are excellent and they do a superb job. So they know their horses really well and they come fully prepared.
Cool. And what would you say is the biggest challenge that you've dealt with in the last 3 years now with that team role? What are the things that, have you had any problems with it, or what's the thing that you really take time to work on as being integral to that role?
WEG was testing. WEG was very hot, and the cross country start being it was a 20-minute hack from the stables. So logistically, for me, because I chaperone the horses wherever they go, so as they're walking down to the cross country, I'm with them. So I go watch them go into the start box, quickly do a U-turn, and then get back to the next one to follow them down, and that was very testing.
And is that why you've literally got? Is that why you've got shoulders of steel, because of the heavy rucksack that you take everywhere with you, having to chaperone the horses?
Yeah, and one of the straps is going on my rucksack, which I'm absolutely gutted about. It's a lucky rucksack.
Well, hopefully there's a nice sponsor listening to the podcast this evening that might want to sponsor the ever so important rucksack that is able to do that job. So
it's amazing though, because it doesn't look that enormous or anything, but I took all Greg's kit out to Lamoulan to the Europeans, and you kind of was loading it all up, and then you're like, all these massive trunks and boxes which weigh an absolute ton, and then you're like, oh, the last thing is a little rucksack, that'll be fine. And you go to pick it up and you're like, crikey, I think we need 2 hands for this one. You
didn't break the strap, did you, Kit?
I didn't break the strap, no.
I reckon it probably weighs the same as you, Kit.
Oh no, I probably weigh an awful lot more after lockdown, unfortunately.
I don't think so.
But no, it's very heavy, and I mean, Greg even follows us down to the dressage. So when we go down to dressage warm up, he's wandering along next to you. And actually, it was really nice having I just remember walking down to the dressage with Froggy, and about, I don't know, a 10-minute walk down to the warm-up arenas. And it was really nice just being able to have a chilled, relaxed chat with someone just before kind of it all started, rather than walking down there getting all kind of nervous and tense. We kind of had a bit of a chat and a laugh, and you kind of went into the warm-up arena really relaxed because you'd had, Greg, who's a very obviously familiar face for me, wandering down with me. So it was, it was really nice having Greg there.
That's that emphasis on the team part of being the team farrier, rather than just seeing it as being the farrier. It's that team role, and I think you would agree, wouldn't you, Greg, that that's something that's an emphasis on what Team GB has been about in the last 3 or 4 years. But it always has been, I'm sure. But I know that's a sort of a culture that I know Richard Waygood's been working on. Is that something that you've seen when you've been in your role in the last few years?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, we're one team. We win together, we lose together, and we're all in it for each other. And a good tour for me is actually not do a thing. Like, all the shoes stay on, all the horses look great, but I just need to be there to help everyone and to take the pressure off and do a little bit I can to help everyone else achieve what they want to achieve.
I'm sure the team vet would probably agree 100% on that.
Yeah.
Now, go on. We'll just talk about. Let's cover. You got any examples of any little challenges that you've had a 3-day, not necessarily in your team role, but working at 3-day events or supporting private clients? Have you, that's the real challenge, isn't it? When you're at a championship, when something does go wrong, shoe comes off or an overreach or those sort of challenges. What does your role then mean? When you are put into action on a Saturday night, what are you planning? What are you doing? What are you planning? What are you, how are you working that out?
Stingy feet really are the biggest issue. I think the ground's very firm, but the feet can't swell, so they get like that compartment syndrome where they just get inflamed, and it's just getting that inflammation out as soon as possible. So icing them, ice water for 3 lots of 20 minutes, checking that no heat is returning to the feet. Very rarely do I have to go to the extreme of putting bar shoes on or anything like that. It seems to be that we can just be proactive and deal with that as soon as they've had everything done. Maybe some horses have to have fluids, or that they can stand their feet in the cold tubs at the same time.
Okay, and that's really relevant now, isn't it? The hard ground. Everyone is.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we're going to be back eventing in the coming weeks, which is all very exciting. And I think there's a lot of talk about the hard ground. What advice would you have about that? You've just referenced it there. What can people do to try and prevent any problems as we go back out eventing?
Well, we can use orthotics. There's 2 types of pads we can use, which are good for dampening vibrations. But as with everything, there is the downside to them. You lose traction with pads because you're basically taking away the sole area coming across. So you have to weigh that up, whether you need to overstud to kind of counteract that, or I think this hard ground, going 5, 6, 7 minutes, then most horses can cope with that. But then, some riders just won't run their horses on the really hard ground. They make a decision that it's not worth it.
And Kitty, you'll be aware of this as well. Everyone is very aware of the ground, and it's something that I know all the organisers of the events will be doing their best to manage. But we haven't had a lot of rain for quite a long time now, through pretty much all of lockdown, and the ground will be firm. I think a lot of the time you hear people say, "Oh, we're just going to stick some pads in or stick a bit of gel in." What do you do at home, Kitty, to make any sort of plans for that, or take into account what that's going to be like in the coming weeks?
Well, the firm ground is something which I have been kind of very conscious about with starting the event season. So I've been trying to not go cross-country schooling and gallop around on the rock hard ground. I've tried to pick my windows when we have had a few showers to try and get the better ground, so I'm not already kind of jarring my horses up before we start. I'm not someone who is a real kind of fan of pads. If a horse needs them, certainly we'd discuss it with Greg and would put them on. But on the whole, I tend to not, have pads on most of mine. But, we ice well after events. If it's been very firm, I'll discuss it with Greg, but we sometimes put some magic cushion in after an event that evening, or, for a few days. And just really try and manage the horses. And also I'll try not to run on ground that I'm not, happy with. And also at the moment I'm looking at the events where I know they've got, on the whole, normally better grass covering, or they water, or perhaps they're in an area in the country where they do have a little bit more rain and the ground's likely to be a little bit better than others. So I'm, really working hard. I'm trying to plan my events around where I think I'm most likely to get the best ground. But, it's in the lap of the gods a little bit with the weather, but trying to do prevention rather than cure.
Yeah. And you mentioned something in there called Magic Cushion, didn't you? Or was it Rebound? Are there a couple of products out there that are used? What do those do, Greg? Which one do you recommend or use? We probably shouldn't recommend on this podcast unless someone sponsors us with money. But that sort of thing. What's the principle of those sort of products?
The anti-inflammatory analgesics, just to draw any, like a natural poultice, to draw any inflammation out of the feet. Magic Cushion is kind of, its base is a chopped up leather, and you pack it into the sole and put some bedding on top and let the horse stand on it, and it will offer arch support, so it will kind of take away the stress off the soft tissue in the foot, whilst also offering comfort and drawing that inflammation away. The downside with it is quite messy. If it gets stuck on, if they lie down, it gets stuck on their elbow, or you get it on your hand. It takes some getting off. Rebound is a similar product, but it doesn't stay in the foot quite as well. You have to wrap it on the foot, and that is Epsom salts and iodine. They're both good measures to have after the cross country or after any, even if you leave the shoe, just to put something in the foot like that.
I remember being at a 3-day, and a horse that was being ridden by a German rider had pulled off a shoe, and the German rider was adamant that they had the ultimate cure for bruised feet, and it was sauerkraut out of a can. And the poor groom had to pack this horse's feet with pickled cabbage, and it was sound as a pound the next day. So maybe we're all missing something with all these.
I've seen that before. I saw that in Swig-On.
Yeah. It's about as entertaining as seeing horses being cooled down with a wet towel over their neck. That's still my other most favourite moment at 3 days. Cool. Okay. Well, another topic that there's been a bit of a request for us to try and touch on and cover is studding and studs, which I know is a huge topic, and we could probably talk about it for hours. But
2 days.
2 days. But sort of simply, and I think again, as you said at the beginning, Greg, try and keep things as simple as possible. What are you trying to achieve when we are studying horses at the cross country? Go on, Kitty, what is your plan? Your groom comes to you, says, what studs do you want in? What are you thinking about what you're choosing and why?
Well, ultimately, I want to feel that the horses are secure when they are moving in the dressage arena, jumping in the show jumping, and going cross country. I always my most hated ground is when it's been really firm and then they get a downpour and it makes it really slick. So I hate that type of ground, and that's when I have a tendency to try and want to overstud, but I try not to. But all mine would have 2 studs in each foot, a slightly smaller, blunter one on the inside, and then slightly bigger one on the outside, and bigger studs in behind than it's done in front, because although I want the horses to be able to gallop well round turns and not be at risk of slipping, equally when they're jumping, I want them to be able to, when they land, their front feet to slightly slide rather than, the stud stop the foot and make it have a lot of concussion go up through it. So I still want a little bit of movement for when the horses land. So I could look at my stud box for hours trying to decide what's best to put in. But it's just assessing the ground, and I just literally go through my stud box and try and work out what I think will be best for that particular event. And if Greg's there, I try and pass the buck to him and make him make the decision for me.
It sounds like you've educated her well, Greg. That's that's
she's
very good summary, isn't it?
That is a model answer.
Good job. I mean,
I did know some stuff then.
I think from our point of view, from a sort of the vet putting, on a Saturday night, same as a farrier, I mean, there is always a concern of overstudding, particularly on firm ground. Would you not agree, Greg? You sometimes just slightly worry about these big studs being put in that.
Yeah, you wince as they walk past you.
The foot's not even getting to the ground because the studs are so big, and you just think that is going to not work out well for them. Do you have anything to add on that, Greg? I mean, you're the man in the know. What's your take on studs beyond what Kitty was saying?
Yeah, she has absolutely nailed it. Safety is the bottom line, but the horse has to not slip up as he's going cross country. But I totally agree with you. I think a slightly smaller inside stud lets the foot come out of the turf quicker. Double studs the same size will cause foot fixation, but the foot will stay in the ground as the limb travels over the top of it. And like you said, slightly bigger studs behind, because that's where they're propelling from. That's what's going into the ground. And I always think of the amount of footballers and NFL players that do ACL ligaments because the studs are stuck in the ground and their leg keeps moving and they injure themselves, and that just makes me cringe that that's happening to a horse's foot.
Yeah, definitely agree on that. We all think about this, as Kitty said, this for riders to have that security and trust in being able to get the grip. But there's definitely a scenario where there's too much grip, and the problems that can bring. So yeah, it is a happy medium, and it is that balance, and it is why Kitty probably sits and stares at her stud box as long as she does, about weighing up the pros and cons of everything. But I would go on, Greg.
No, I was going to say they're tuned into their horses, and they've ridden around these tracks lots of times, and like in the Moulin, the ground's slightly different to Bramham, very different to Bramham, but they select the stud suitable for the ground and the conditions and the environment.
Yeah, I
just reassure them.
I was looking back on some of the cross country at London back in 2012 during lockdown, which was quite entertaining, and it was wonderful turf there, but it was very interesting how many horses did slip, because it had quite a sort of almost like a short route structure, wasn't it? And there was a sort of a slipping issue there, and and that can be a scenario as well, can't it, Kit? When you see the first few horses go out on cross country, and actually you can gain some information on that, and maybe change which studs you're using based on what other people are doing. Is that would you say that's fair?
Oh, definitely. If I'm watching, if I'm lucky enough to be a bit later on, and I can watch some of them go, and you see them kind of slipping and sliding about around the corners and things, and it definitely makes me review perhaps what I'm putting in, particularly behind, just to try and give my horse that much more kind of grip and confidence. Because also I find with a horse, once it slips once round a turn, then they nearly kind of brace themselves for the next turn, thinking the same thing's going to happen, and then because they've braced themselves and haven't let themselves down on the ground, then they're kind of more likely to slip. So then it becomes a vicious circle. So I try and look to see what is going on the track, and might change my plan if horses are slipping a lot. And equally, if there's one particular turn that is really causing horses to slip and more than any of the others, I would just take that one a little bit more carefully and maybe wait a few seconds to then keep my horse confident around the rest of the track and the other twists and turns that they might have.
Okay. And that I always think, and what about like numbers of studs? Would you always go 2 in front, 2 behind? Or I know that there would potentially be some people who like just 1 outside stud in front. I think you see some of the jumpers when they jump, the pure show jumpers jumping big tracks on grass often have 3, if not 4 studs in their hind feet. Have you ever had scenarios, Greg, where you've used different numbers of studs, and why would you veer away from what your standard sort of protocol would be?
Yeah, on the event horses, it's maximum two studs per foot. I know the jumpers are twisting and turning and need a lot of traction behind, but for an event horse, if a rider was to fall off and God forbid they got trampled on, it's not very
they'd have 4 holes rather than 2.
yeah, pin cushion. But I've also seen shoes be twisted off from where they've been overstudded.
Really?
Usually sheared off, yeah. And that just shows how much torsion is put on the shoe, on the foot.
Yeah. And what about, again, just touching on this subject, another thing that you see when you go from, from my point of view, from yard to yard, is almost the position of the stud within the shoe. So where the stud hole is seems to vary as well. And I think when things like vary between, is because there's not necessarily a consensus on what the correct answer is. How do you choose, Greg, where that stud hole sits? Is it right at the far back end of the at the shoe, right under the heel, or is it a little bit further forward? And sometimes I've seen ones where it's quite a long way forward, which has surprised me. What's the theory behind moving that stud hole around?
Yeah, so there's actually very limited research on that. And for me, the stud hole towards the heel of the shoe will decelerate the foot quicker, because it hits the floor quicker. So it's going to create more jarring, more vibrations, and we know the musculoskeletal system doesn't like vibrations. Go too far forward, go towards the widest part of the foot, and then you're in danger of brushing and causing a direct trauma to the opposite limb. So the happy medium is in between the two. but watch this space, because hopefully there will be a research project on it soon.
Yeah,
so I have the answer for you.
Yeah, I did know that there was some research going into that, but I think it is because it's it's with all these sort of things in particularly with horses, when there's more than one answer, it's because there's not enough evidence to say one is right and one is wrong, essentially. And hopefully we're going to be in a position of having some stats and having some papers published on that. And I think Team GB lead the way with that. And there's some great minds behind the scenes, or even at the front of the scenes, that are dealing with that, aren't they, Greg? And I think that's something that we, the world class program and what Team GB do is very good. That's nothing against the other nations that are out there by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that's where that sort of central funding can go into stuff that really benefits horse sport as a whole and in general. So, hopefully there will be some interesting research in that going forward. Final subject to just cover before we wrap up is there were some questions through the Flick group about hoof quality and how we can try and improve the quality of hooves. What do you do at your yard, Kitty, from the point of view of managing feet, from the point of view of what do your grooms do every day? Are you greasing, oils? Do you have them on any supplements? What do you do to make sure you've got really good quality feet?
I mean, they're all on a balancer which has, stuff in to help the feet, but it's not a specific hoof supplement. I don't tend to put them on a specific hoof supplement unless Greg has kind of advised something. And then all our horses get their feet picked out very regularly. When they come, at the moment, a lot of mine are living out, so when they come in, they'll get their feet picked out. To get them picked out before they're ridden. I pick them out when I'm leaving the arena, and then when they get brushed off and done, they get them picked out again. They get hoof oil put on them. Some of them, if they've got, a touch of thrush or anything like that, they will have peroxide or something put in there, or a thrush treatment. But on the whole, I'm quite lucky at the moment with all my horses' feet. They've all got pretty good quality, and they haven't got particularly weak walls where when Greg reshoes them, then all the nail holes kind of split and the foot is weak and awful. They've all got pretty good feet, so we don't have to do a huge amount of things out of the ordinary with mine, which I'm very lucky from that aspect.
Are we going to give her a little bit more credit than that, Greg? Because I think that, again, we go back to that attention to detail. I think all the things that you cover there is what ensures that you have horses that do have good quality hooves. And that goes down to, all aspects of daily foot management. Greg, if you were going to say sort of, gold standard, what is integral for trying to manage hoof quality? Of course, there are always horses that, for whatever reason, don't produce good quality feet, but in a generalistic way, there definitely are some things that we can do to try and ensure that they do have good feet.
Yeah, I think, like you said, pick their feet out regularly, limit the amount of anaerobic bacteria that harvest in their feet. Use a good quality hoof conditioner. The hoof has its own protective barrier called periopal, which is a thin skin that goes over the surface of the hoof wall, but because of the modern surfaces, it gets worn away. So it's really important to artificially replace it with a good natural barrier. But there's quite a few on the market. One in a red pot, very good. One in a black pot, very good.
No, I think I see what you're doing there, but I think it's important to differentiate between the sort of the oils that get painted on that basically just make a foot look black and sit on the surface versus the greases that definitely get absorbed into there, and not mentioning any names of any products as such, and people can go and do their own research on that. But that's a strong differentiation between the style of the product, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And in this dry weather, feet dehydrate so quickly. So double up on your greasing or your hoof conditioner. Just try and keep it in prime conditions. Because a horse like Kit's, if they're out at night, then they come in and they'll stand in the stable and they'll go in the school and maybe then get washed off and then go back out. So they go for a lot of changes in the environment during the day. So anything that just keeps them a bit constant will help them out.
And just touching on supplements there, I mean, until the whole box is sponsored by a nice supplement company, I'm not going to mention any by name, but there are different ones out there, and you're aiming for things that have a high biotin content, and do your research. You follow a product that you trust, and one bit of advice would always be to be using supplements that follow the beta NOPS policy, and see that stamp on them, because that means that you're using a supplement that follows beta, and therefore you can feel very confident that you're not risking contamination, and that means that they've signed up to industry standards. So that's something that I think is a good bit of advice.
I was going to say, it's a broad spectrum supplement is best.
Lovely. Well, I think we've covered a great deal there, and I think we should wrap it up. I'm going to ask you, Greig, 3 things for take-home messages for the lovely listeners this evening that everyone can do to keep their farrier happy. So what can we do to make life better for you, Greig? I've already thought number 1, which is bacon rolls, but in this sort of new coronavirus world that we live in, it's probably a little bit trickier. But what other things can we do to make sure that we keep our farrier happy?
Socially distant bacon rolls. What can you do? Like we've said all the way along, communicate with your farrier. That is in capital letters. And
also, you like a cup of tea.
Yeah, bottomless tea is a must. And don't paint your horse's feet before they're shod.
Or before the vet comes to vet it. That's another thing as well.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, that's great, Greig. We want to keep our farriers happy. They work bloody hard, and particularly in this weather. So it's an integral part of this. And I always, it's an old-fashioned thing of no foot, no horse, and it's very true. And they are an integral part of the team that supports horses and keeps them on the road and keeps them doing their job. So thank you for coming on this evening, Greig. Thank you for coming on this evening, Kitty. Cool. And thank you, everyone, for listening this evening. And looking forward to the next episode of The Whole Box. Please feed back to us through Flick and through the Flick group and the different social media channels about future subjects that we can talk about. But for this evening, thanks very much, guys, and take care.
Thank you for listening to the Echo Ratings Eventing podcast. This podcast is available for free on iTunes, Spotify, Podcast Addict, or wherever you usually listen to your podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. Find us at eventingpodcast.com or search Eventing Podcast on social media.